洱海是我们的母亲湖，保护好以后才可以持续性发展。
我们把黄沙之城日住了，日水青山，就是金山银山这个理念也就实现了。
我们要深怀对自然的敬畏之心，尊重自然，顺应自然，保护自然，构建人与自然和谐共生的地球家园。
I've spent the better part of the last 2 days with He Licheng, a local Dali fisherman that's witnessed the turmoil and changes of his hometown's environmental and ecological development. The 55-year-old has spent his entire life here, and as he tells me, problems began to emerge in the late 90s, when pollution and algae plagued the waters of Erhai Lake. To his dismay, environmental policies would result in him shutting down his fishing boats and ponds.
当时我建了这个鱼塘，花了我11年的这个心血。
Reflecting on his past, Mr. He recalls investing his family's entire income into a fishing boat and pond, an investment that eventually went to waste.
当时心里面很难过，因为我们毕竟是靠水吃水。 我们的这个生计就成了问题。
Erhai Lake is China's 7th largest body of water, covering 250 square kilometers. Decades ago, more than 1 million people resided along the shorelines of the lake. Aside from traditional fishing, the serene environment pushed some of the residents to transform their homes into homestays, including Mr. He. His own guest house was opened in 2012, which made him an annual income of around $6,000. But as I learn more about his story, it tells me how despite the newfound business success, the tourism boom in fact led to even more environmental impacts. Speaking with Mr. He, I learned that the Chinese president has attached great importance to the protection of the waters here, which is drank and consumed by more than 800,000 locals.
So I'm here outside of the home of Li Dechang. He's a local resident here in Dali, and as we enter this courtyard here, his home is on the shorelines of Erhai Lake. Just beyond this wall is that iconic lake that defines the town and city of Dali. But what makes this home special, especially this courtyard, is back in 2015, Chinese President Xi Jinping paid a visit to his home, of course, touring other parts of Dali, and his main message to people here was all about protecting the environment. He sat down here speaking with some of the local residents, checking in on them, seeing how their lives here are developing in Dali.
我跟省委书记、省长在你们洱海边上留了一张合影。我说我现在看到这个水啊，希望多少年过了以后再照一张照片，那时候的水比现在更干净，啊，更清澈。如果不干净了，我要找你。
Asking about the president's visit, Mr. Li tells me that it brought not only greater funding for environmental protection, but more importantly, an increase in awareness. From 2011 to 2016, the number of tourists visiting Dali increased from 15 million to 39 million. But statistics show that driven by huge economic benefits, about 90% of the restaurants and hotels around Erhai Lake were operating illegally. They were also the main source of pollution, exacerbated by the absence of sewage treatment facilities. In 2017, Yunnan announced a series of measures, including bans on catering businesses that discharge pollutants into Erhai Lake. More than 2,400 restaurants and homestays were shut, including that of Mr. He's, which was closed for 8 months.
我刻在罐体以后，水是20瓦左右。但是这一次我们付出呢，我们一点都不后悔。
一点都不后悔
啊！一直非常支持，因为当时我们是也想到，我们靠这个洱海吃饭，这个洱海环境好了，水质好了，我们才会有可持续性发展。
Then came the construction of a new ecological corridor alongside the shores of the lake. This would end up with Mr. He tearing down parts of his family in, but this time he changed his attitude completely.
当时也是没有怨言，直接就是双手赞同拆除， 是我们起到带头作用。
This is what Mr. He kept on telling me during the day. With the improvement of water quality, many villagers, including him, started other business ventures in 2020. Mr. He secured 580 acres of land to grow rice and oilseeds. This was also what the government called the green and organic agriculture industry.
After more than 2 decades of persistent efforts to clean up the shores and waters of Erhai Lake, both locals and visitors can now enjoy this lush and serene environment. But the hopes are that this isn't something temporary, but instead something that lasts for future generations to come. From the depths of Erhai Lake to China's arid northwest in Gansu province, I've come here to meet with a multi-generational group of people, families of farmers that have committed their entire lives to combating desertification across the Babusha Desert. "40 years ago, this entire area was barren, with expanding sand dunes as a result of drought and overcropping.
最开始做哈这个里的时候是，有个房子有个住处，啥周围来了，周围都是和老汉都这种。他说我不盖了，我50多岁了，这个热死在这个地方。
As the last of the first generation of farmers to be known as the Six Old Men, Zhang Runyuan, together with 5 other villagers, began planting trees together dating back to the 80s. By the turn of the century, their shovels and hands would plant more than 10 million trees across 50 square kilometers of desert. In 2019, the locals of Babusha were recognized for their anti-desertification efforts during a visit by Chinese President Xi Jinping.
总是这还拿出我们的开工了，和我们是参加治沙劳动，非常的感动。
希望你们在这里再接再厉，再立新功，更上一层楼，把这个巴布沙呀，你们现在保护的地区的治理搞得很好。
我没想到我们做了我们应该做的事情，他的工作那么忙，国家大事那么多，能到这个沙湾湾来看望我们这些人。
It was right here where Chinese President Xi Jinping plowed through some of the soil, taking part in the desertification control measures here in Gansu province. And what the 6 old men have accomplished and continue to do over the past several generations resonates with what the Chinese president referred to as the Yugong spirit.
The locals later told me that the spirit of Yugong, taken from Chinese folklore, refers to the tireless efforts of generations who aim to change the seemingly impossible and treacherous natural environment.
As the 6 old men aged, they made a pact, a commitment that all of their families would carry on the arduous task of pushing back the desert. But Guo Wangang, a second-generation farmer, was reluctant in the beginning when his father passed the responsibility to him to maintain the greenery they had started.
一开始啊，那么他们这个寸草不生的沙漠很不理解，也不相信你这个老人能把啥治住，因为给我这个感觉，刮风下雨啊，自然灾害，我们人类是治不住的。
Then calamity struck in 1993. A sandstorm that left 23 people dead, including 18 children. This changed Guo forever, realizing the significance of what his predecessors had set out to do.
我们连我们的孩子都保不住，我们的来日生存的土都保不住，我们这个地方不治沙怎么生活了？
As he looks on at the saplings that have been planted, growing taller day by day, his determination to curb the desert's expansion has only been amplified over the past few decades.
那么村子皮不毛枝子啊，对成村子的皮日周3年时间。
Over a span of 38 years, 3 generations of the 6 old men have pushed back more than 2,000 hectares of sand and planted 30 million trees across the desert. Nearly 7,000 hectares of farmland has now been protected, with a green corridor now established to prevent further spread of the sand.
So I've been speaking with Mr. Guo for this past hour or so. We've been sort of setting up these grass grids here to protect the sand from flying around. And from his experience, he's been doing this for 4 generations, 4 decades. Every day, 6:30 a.m. in the morning to 6:30 at night, maybe even longer. Not much in sight here in this desert, so they've been doing this for so long. 3 generations of different families, different farmers out here, all doing this to hopefully have some vegetation in the future, protect the spread of sand, and hopefully bring some more greenery and color to Babusha. I gotta keep going.
What I saw in these 2 distinctive parts of China was how ordinary people have made sacrifices to protect the environment, not only for today, but for future generations. The country's top leadership recognized them as role models of environmental protection and has called for unremitting efforts to consolidate China's green ecological barriers. The dividends will perhaps bear fruit in years to come.